Star Trek Into Darkness is easily the most controversial theatrical Star Trek movie. Sure, there have been controversies in the past. The motion picture was criticized for its pacing, the new look of the Klingons, the uniforms, and the overall tone. Star Trek II had the death of Spock, which generated massive, organized fan backlash, but that movie is now one of the most beloved and revered Star Trek movies. Star Trek III killed Kirk's son, and some people wanted Spock to stay dead, including Star Trek II's Nicholas Meyer. Star Trek Generations was controversial because of the death of Kirk, and many Next Generation fans wanted a purely Next Generation movie. Many people did not like the 2009 Star Trek reboot from JJ Abrams for several reasons, most of which I addressed in my previous video about that film on this channel. But no single Star Trek theatrical release has generated as much criticism from Trekkies and general audiences alike as the 2013 Star Trek movie Star Trek Into Darkness. Let's get into it. Let's talk about where this movie goes wrong, what it does right, and it does get some things right, and where it makes some awful mistakes in the storytelling, the marketing, and its place in the larger Star Trek universe. Star Trek Into Darkness is old enough for a Vulcan-like logical analysis with some McCoy-like sarcasm thrown into the mix. When I rewatched this film in preparation for this video, I found myself asking a lot of questions about the plot and realized that many of my questions did not have answers. The only answer I could think of is that the writers needed things to be a certain way to force plot devices that would otherwise not make any sense. Unfortunately, that leaves a lot of logical problems, which I'll get into. If you are watching this, I'm assuming you've already watched Star Trek Into Darkness, and I will be going into a lot of plot details. Spoilers ahead. I'd like to take a brief moment to introduce myself. My name is Eric Wilfred Watson, and I am the author of 3 novels. These books are on Amazon.com. Your purchase supports this channel. Star Trek Into Darkness starts off with a little prologue that looks nice. It's well shot. It's pretty fun. And at first glance, it is very Star Trek-y. But much like the previous film, the action goes by so quickly that it's easy to miss how ridiculous it actually is. Kirk is running through a red forest being chased by the locals. I like the look of this planet with little creatures and red vegetation. It's a nice looking alien world. The little alien monster thing growls at Kirk, so Kirk shoots it. McCoy is mad for stunning their ride. McCoy yells in an exasperated tone, "You just stunned our ride!" The obvious question is, wouldn't Kirk have known about that part of the plan? Apparently, the plan was to ride an alien monster someplace, but Kirk zapped the monster, so instead they jump off a ridiculously high cliff into the water. That would be an extremely dangerous thing to do, and I'm sure Dr. McCoy would be fully aware of that. They swim to the submerged Enterprise. We learn that the reason Kirk and crew are there is to stop a volcano from erupting and destroying the planet. A volcano destroying an entire planet seems unlikely, but let's go with it. Why did Spock need to go inside the volcano to detonate the suitcase cold fusion device to stop the eruption? Does cold fusion do that? It seems like the writers used a science fiction-y sounding word without knowing or caring what it meant. Whatever they call it, couldn't they have just dropped the thing in the volcano from above? Why did Spock have to go into the volcano? Why did the starship have to be in the ocean? They never explain why. Assuming that beaming wasn't an option for some reason, couldn't they have just gone down in a shuttlecraft? It was just Kirk, McCoy, and Spock on the planet. Why did they need the entire gigantic ship to go underwater? And why so close to the native peoples? If one of the mission objectives was to save the primitive people in the temple, couldn't they have just used the transporters to beam them out, render them unconscious, and then beam them back afterwards? This whole plan, if you can call it a plan, is embarrassingly dumb. It goes by very quickly, so you almost don't notice how dumb it is. It's well executed visually, and the audiences aren't supposed to notice how ridiculous it is. After Kirk's violation of the Prime Directive is made known to Starfleet, it's funny that Kirk's punishment is to be demoted to First Officer, a position that he is still years away from being qualified to have. I wonder if Starfleet gave him leniency because they realized their own error in allowing him to command the ship in the first place with almost no experience. Then the movie shows us Earth. I actually like seeing London and the UK flag. I guess nation states are still somewhat of a thing in the 23rd century. Maybe they're just part of the United Earth government. the way Idaho is part of the United States. Maybe it was just a cultural symbol rather than a political one. I'd be curious to know how that all works, but it really isn't important here. I actually like the scene of the parents with the sick kid. It was a sad sequence. It was told through music and visuals without really any dialogue until Benedict Cumberbatch's character said that he could save the child. JJ Abrams has talent from working from behind the camera. And the music was good, it conveyed the proper emotions, it was shot well, it was paced well. There are plenty of excellent moments in this dumpster fire of a movie. This part of the film showed us that John Harrison, aka Khan's blood, had a healing property to it that sets up something for later in the movie. If Khan was genetically engineered to be a super soldier leader, I guess it almost makes sense that his blood would have healing properties like that, even though we've never seen that before. And that brings me to one of the biggest mistakes in the movie, and that would be the marketing. They lied to the audience about Khan's appearance in the film. Fans were speculating that because this was another Star Trek II, that they might bring Khan back. JJ Abrams and the writers said no, it wasn't Khan. They understandably wanted us to be surprised when the big reveal came that it actually was Khan, but to flat out lie to the audience just pissed people off.
And the amount of times we had to lie for him, the amount of secrets, the amount of times I had to not talk about it being my character.
JJ Abrams insisted it was a guy named John Harrison. Bad move, guys. Admit it was Khan or be coy about it if asked, but don't flat out lie. That soured the fans on the movie before they even saw it, and for general audiences who didn't know anything about Khan, the reveal was meaningless. After the bombing in London and the meeting in the Dr. Strangelove Situation Room, and yes, this looks exactly like Dr. Strangelove, I think they did that on purpose, Kirk realizes that Starfleet protocol mandates that should such a thing occur, that all captains and first officers must meet in this very specific secret room, in a very specific building, apparently at a very specific time, which seems very specifically ridiculous. I don't think there would be such a regulation, but it gives Khan and the movie writers the opportunity to shoot inside the building with some sort of spaceship thingy. It looks a lot like the attack by the Kazon from Star Trek Voyager. By the way, is anyone really a fan of this style of Starfleet uniform? They are very militaristic. Starfleet outposts have armed guards on Earth. Isn't this supposed to be a utopian paradise on Earth where there is no more violence, no more prejudice? Is it because of Admiral Marcus wanting a militarized Starfleet? I don't know. It just doesn't seem to fit, and it doesn't look good. I don't like the aesthetic. During Khan's attack, Kirk wraps his weapon around a fire hose and throws it out the window, which gets sucked into the engine and causes the ship to crash. But would there have been a fire hose behind an unmarked panel? There are no better fire suppression systems almost 300 years from now? Anyway, Pike dies in a very emotional sequence. I thought it was interesting that Spock mind-melded with Pike at that exact moment. But Kirk goes over and cries a CGI self-drying tear and ruins it. Chris Pine is a good actor, but the awkwardly shot scene of him crying with the computer graphics tear was just a little off-putting and distracting. Then it is learned that Khan beamed himself to Kronos, the Klingon homeworld. There was a controversy about this when the movie came out. People claimed that now that people can beam to other planets, starships would no longer be needed. In fairness, they do mention in the movie it took a tremendous amount of energy to do this, so it makes it impractical for multiple people to do that. However, it would still have a gigantic effect on Federation society. And it's funny that that kind of technology is never addressed again in the sequel. After the attack, and after the whereabouts of Khan are discovered, Admiral Marcus orders James Kirk back in command of the Starship Enterprise with Spock as his first officer, and tells him to launch super-secret torpedoes at the uninhabited part of Kronos where Khan, aka John Harrison, is hiding. We aren't supposed to know this is Khan yet, even though everyone watching the movie already knows. Kirk is given very clear military orders. However, his chief engineer, Scotty, does not like this. He doesn't know what's inside of the torpedoes, so he refuses to let them on the ship. So he gets relieved of duty for disobeying Kirk's orders. However, because Spock didn't like the idea of these orders to fire the torpedoes that Admiral Marcus provided, Kirk disobeys Admiral Marcus's orders and decides on a landing party instead. Spock says Kirk made the right decision to disobey these orders, even though he very clearly disagreed with Kirk violating the Prime Directive to save his own life. Spock's willingness to go along with orders and regulations seems to be very case by case, apparently. The chain of command seems to not have any real weight to it. See the video on my other channel about Starfleet and following orders. Link in the description below. Anyway, the little ship that they used to go to Kronos is something that was confiscated off-screen from an incident with Harry Mudd, a flamboyant antagonist from the original series. How they got this little ship is never mentioned, although I do believe there's a comic book tie-in that shows those events. En route to Kronos, Uhura and Spock get into a fight at an inappropriate time, but I do like Spock's speech about why he doesn't feel, which I thought was a very in-character and very Vulcan-like moment, a good moment in this dumpster fire of a movie. And by the way, the Klingons have every right to be pissed off that humans showed up on their planet unannounced. Uhura tried to appeal to their sense of honor. That was a smart tactic, although it didn't work, obviously, but it was a nice try. I like the look of these Klingons, and I like the look of the Klingon helmets. When the main Klingon took off his helmet, he had these head ridges that were either gold-plated or pierced or whatever it was. I thought it looked pretty neat. It looked pretty badass. Why Khan went to the Klingon homeworld in the first place, I don't know. It's never really explained. Why did Khan show up at that exact moment when Uhura and crew arrived? Did he know that they were going to land there at that moment? Khan using a super cool weapon, killing all the Klingons, that was fun to watch. It was a nice little action sequence, but it lacked any logical elements other than JJ Abrams wanted Klingons to be in the movie. Khan surrendered when he learned how many torpedoes there were, which matched the number of Eugenics Wars augment survivors that were part of Khan's crew. It was smart, good tactical decision that he made. I also appreciated the part where Kirk punches Khan in the face over and over, and Khan just sort of not caring and rolling with it and not fighting back. Then they put Khan in the brig on the Enterprise, which brings me to one of my favorite little science fiction elements in this movie. There is a movable hole in the wall of the brig. I don't know, it just seems really futuristic and really cool, and the characters take it for granted. I think it's a great little piece of science fiction gadgetry, and I wish they showed that in other movies, but they don't. And as an aside, whoever photoshopped Darth Vader into the brig deserves a trophy. Now, believe it or not, I appreciate the writing here. While in the brig, Khan tells Kirk the truth, and the absolute unvarnished truth, which is interesting for a villain. Sometimes bad guys give accurate info, and it helps them to justify their ends, but Khan isn't really the main villain of this story. Admiral Marcus is. More on him later. And then we cut to San Francisco, where apparently partying and drinking and debauchery is part of our futuristic utopia, and club music still sounds like club music in 300 years. Scotty is drinking and gets a call from Kirk and relays the coordinates that Khan gave him, so Scotty goes to investigate. Later, Admiral Marcus shows up in his gigantic USS Vengeance ship, and I can't deny it. It's a cool-looking ship. The conversation between Kirk and Marcus over the view screen is decently written, and Peter Weller delivers a fantastic performance as Admiral Marcus. Admiral Marcus denies knowing anything about the engine trouble that stranded the Enterprise and could have caused the Enterprise's destruction, but everything he says is pretty much true, except for his willingness to let the Enterprise crew be killed wasn't something he'd admit. When Kirk went to warp to escape, the USS Vengeance caught up with him, and that was a really cool scene. The sound design of the ship overtaking the Enterprise was great. It was a well-done bit of filmmaking in this dumpster fire of a movie. I have problems with the story, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this part is presented to us well. It has tension, it has action. The combat sequence afterwards is really well shot, the CGI holds up, and there is real suspense and tension when Kirk begs for mercy from Admiral Marcus, and Marcus's reply was, "I was never going to spare your crew." It shows a cold-blooded, evil character that Peter Weller delivers perfectly. However, that is out of place for a Star Trek utopian future that Star Trek is supposed to be all about. How did Admiral Marcus get that far, being that much of a sadistic bastard? There have been admirals in other Star Treks where they did things that were bad or wrong, but I don't remember one ever being overtly evil. Maybe in Star Trek VI, where the admirals wanted to start a war with the Klingons, and maybe that's where they got the idea for this movie. But even then, in Star Trek VI, the admirals weren't willing to murder an entire Starfleet crew in cold blood, and they weren't able to have a ship filled with people willing to do so. After the USS Enterprise is in trouble after some space combat, Jim Kirk goes into the warp core to fix it, and he knows that going in there means he will die of radiation poisoning. Is there no radiation suit next to a giant radioactive thing? Wouldn't that be a logical safety precaution on a ship like this? Kirk dying made absolutely no sense because no one watching the movie thought that Jim Kirk was actually going to die, or at least not stay dead. He just got the Enterprise. They were trying to launch a new franchise. There was no suspense that Kirk would actually die. However, in the original Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, when Leonard Nimoy's Spock died, that was a very different circumstance. Leonard Nimoy didn't want to play Spock anymore at that time, and there was a real possibility that this was actually it. Leonard Nimoy was tired of the role. Spock's death was really supposed to be Spock's death. Director Nicholas Meyer didn't intend for Spock to come back, and neither did Leonard Nimoy. The studio was responsible for the little scene at the end where Spock's casket is on the Genesis planet, which left the door open for the sequel. In the early 1980s, there was real drama about Spock's death. That just wasn't the case during this part where Kirk died in Star Trek Into Darkness. It just comes off as gimmicky, unoriginal, and lame. I usually like a setup and payoff, and Star Trek Into Darkness did attempt to do this with Kirk's resurrection. Khan's magic blood was shown to have healing properties earlier in the movie, which gave us the excuse to do this in the movie here now at the end. The movie writers did give themselves an out by having Kirk supposedly die and come back to life within minutes, but it's just garbage storytelling. I have to admit that the Enterprise falling through the clouds and then rising back up was a pretty cool looking sequence though, but it's overshadowed by the storytelling fails. Anything that looks good about the movie is just overshadowed by the mistakes that the movie makes. When Kirk temporarily dies and Spock yells, "Khan!" in a manner similar to yelling Khan in The Wrath of Khan, no one takes it seriously because it doesn't make any sense. In Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan, Kirk yelling Khan makes sense because Khan marooned them. At this point in the movie, it was Admiral Marcus that crippled their ship, not Khan. There's no reason for Spock to yell the word Khan other than a reference to a different, better movie, and audiences knew that, and it didn't work. The worst part of the movie is when Khan thinks that all of his former crew are dead, and he decides to take his revenge by deliberately crashing the USS Vengeance starship into San Francisco. He smashes into high-rise buildings in something that is way too reminiscent of 9/11. Apparently, writer Robert Orci, may he rest in peace, had some strong opinions about 9/11, and it was probably deliberately put into the movie to be a 9/11 reference, but it was too unpleasant for a Star Trek action movie. Presumably, thousands upon thousands of people died in those high-rises for a cheap action shot that is never really addressed again. Pretty uncool. I usually like getting glimpses of Earth in the 23rd or 24th centuries, but I'm not sure I like the look of San Francisco in this JJ Abrams universe. There are a lot of flying cars, and it seems like they were trying to go for the Star Wars capital Coruscant, something that had that general feel to it. I am reminded of a Star Trek The Next Generation episode called The Big Goodbye, where Jean-Luc Picard was amazed by seeing actual automobiles on the holodeck.
When I looked down into the street, I actually saw automobiles.
Yet in San Francisco of the future, roads pretty much look the same as they do now with cars and buses. The only difference is they're floating instead of rolling on wheels, but what else would you call them other than a car? No vehicles had wheels, but there's plenty of car traffic. It just wasn't the vibe of a Star Trek future, in my opinion. It seemed more like a Blade Runner movie or some generic science fiction movie. It didn't seem very Star Trek, especially the steaming garbage scows that Khan and Spock would be fighting on. Some people criticize the angry Spock punching Khan, but it's logical for him to be trying to apprehend Khan and using physical force to do so, and keep in mind that he's emotionally compromised after losing his entire planet. We can forgive him for being a little pissed off here. I had no problem with that. In fact, I actually thought it was cool that Khan was able to fight his way through a Vulcan neck pinch. We've never seen that before. I liked that. It was also interesting seeing Spock use a weaponized face-grabbing mind meld. Interesting. I thought that was a well-thought-out thing, but again, it's just one nice little element in a dumpster fire of a movie. After the climax and after Kirk returns to life, the movie ends with the Enterprise being given its 5-year mission like the original series. That, I think, is supposed to be the end of the origin story. We are now at the point where TOS, the original series, was, albeit with a new alternate reality. That's fine, I guess. As a movie, not a Star Trek movie, but just as a movie, it's better than I remember it being, and I think it's better than the 2009 Star Trek movie. But as a Star Trek movie, it is the worst theatrical Star Trek film. Decent movie, horrible Star Trek movie, if you catch the distinction there. I don't count the atrocious Section 31 movie because that was a made-for-TV thing. If interested, see my review of that turd on this channel. Star Trek Into Darkness stands on its own. If you've never seen anything Star Trek before, the movie works, it's entertaining, it's well put together, but as part of the Star Trek universe, it's reprehensible and it is basically antagonistic to everything Star Trek has always been about prior to this movie. It is the opposite of everything I watch Star Trek for, with the exception of some good character moments and some good storytelling elements, not overall storytelling, but a few elements and a few visuals. Paradoxically, the movie is good and horrible. It is a well-done, horrible movie. Let me know in the comments what you think. Is there anything redeemable about Star Trek Into Darkness, or is it just one big turd? Thank you very much for watching this channel. Please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us out tremendously. I'm open to suggestions. What movie would you like me to go into next? I do reactions, I do reviews, I do breakdowns. Let me know in the comments what you think. Until next time, folks, thanks again, and live long and prosper.